many of us have committed our lives and our hearts to love and justice and peace and understanding, and have pretty high ideals. It's just the kind of folks we are. And so it's been a tough day. So the interesting thing about this program being tonight is that it is a chance for us to say, in fact, we can learn ways to stop fear, because we know that fear is what's behind hatred, and knowledge is what can be behind love. Because when you know somebody, it's hard to hate them. It's possible to love. So I'm very happy to welcome all of you with your quest for knowledge and your hopes that we can reduce fear in the world, to welcome you this evening. I'm going to read to you, we have these little namaste cards that we hand out. They're called heart balm cards that you can take with you if you want, but it gives us the reading of what namaste means. It means, my soul honors your soul. I honor the place in you where the entire universe resides. I honor the light, the love, the truth, the beauty, and the peace within you, because it is also within me. In sharing these things, we are united. We are the same. We are one. And so it is wonderful for me to honor the divine in me and in you as we come together to seek to reduce fear in our world. Tonight, more than any other night, we need to feel committed to that. And now I'd like to invite a member of our congregation to introduce our speaker.
Thank you, Reverend Linda, and thank you all so much for coming out this evening. My name is Shannon Bruder, and I am a member of the congregation here at UUCA, and I'm also a member of the Board of Directors of the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, ISPU. The ISPU was founded after September 11th to combat fear with facts and to conduct research that would combat bias against Muslims in America. Over the past 15 years, ISPU has become the go-to organization for objective information on Muslim American community. In recent years, Islamophobia has been a focus of ISPU's research. As we grapple tonight with the reality of a president-elect who laced his campaign with anti-Muslim rhetoric and who even went as far as to call for a ban on Muslims entering the country. This work could not be more timely. ISPU's groundbreaking research helps us to understand and combat not only Islamophobia, but all threats to religious freedom. It applies not only to Muslim Americans, but to African Americans, Latinos, members of the LGBTQ community, and people with disabilities, and other groups that are subjected to discrimination and bigotry. Tonight, we're fortunate to have with us the Executive Director of ISPU, who will talk about this groundbreaking research and its implications for how each of us can combat discrimination and bigotry that we observe or experience in our daily lives. So please welcome ISPU's Executive Director, Meira Neggaz.
Thank you so much for inviting me here tonight. Thank you for coming and turning out. I've quite literally spent the entire day speechless. I don't think I've spoken much the entire day. I've been pretty speechless, so it's really weird to be standing here tonight and having to talk for 20 minutes about this. So I will do my best. But I think this is really important. What I'm going to share with you tonight is based on ISPU's research. We did a number of different research projects that I'm going to draw from tonight and sort of mix and match all about Islamophobia. And I think really, even though sometimes facts and data can seem a little bit dry, it's incredibly important to arm people with the knowledge and understanding and tools with which to talk about this in an intelligent way. I think we're all feeling raw emotion, and being armed with facts to combat some of the things that people are saying is really important. So that's my job here tonight, is to kind of arm you with those facts. So if I nod a lot, it's because I'm having someone very kindly change my slides. So I want to start by saying that if America was a body, a human body, American Muslims would be a vital organ. American Muslims are not an appendix. They're not something you can just take out and the body will function. They're actually a liver, or a heart. They're a vital part of this country. American Muslims are a brain trust. They're actually one of the most educated communities in the country. They're the most likely community to be job-creating entrepreneurs, and the most likely community also to be employed. And many Muslims, like other faith groups, absolutely and categorically oppose attacks on civilians, and actually are very, are working with their neighbors and many others to combat what we're all afraid of. We just did research in Michigan, just looking at the state of Michigan and trying to quantify the contributions of American Muslims who live in Michigan in things like medicine, engineering, arts and culture, philanthropy. I won't share a lot of data with you about this tonight because we haven't even published this research, but just a few data points. If you think about just the state of Michigan, Muslims make up just 2.75% of the Michigan population, but 4% of all patents in Michigan are given to Muslim engineers. So 4% of patents, that's 1,600 inventions that Muslims have created in the state of Michigan in the past few years. 95,000 jobs have been created by Muslim Americans in Michigan. Muslim doctors in Michigan care for 1.6 million patients. Muslims have given $177 million in philanthropy over the past few years just in the state of Michigan. And in 2015, Muslims spent $5.5 billion in the state of Michigan back into the Michigan economy. They are a vital organ. So today I want to talk about Islamophobia, and I want to talk a little bit about what it is, where it comes from, why are we seeing this, what is its impact on society, what is the actual problem, how does it affect us all, and what are some things that we can do to combat it. So that's going to be my story arc. So the first place to start is, what is Islamophobia? And I think we all know that it's anti-Muslim bigotry and discrimination based on an irrational hatred or, quote, fear of Islam. It can take a lot of forms. It can be very, very blatant and violent, but it can also be very insipid and seemingly harmless. My own first experience with Islamophobia, not being a Muslim myself, occurred on my honeymoon when I married my Muslim husband, who originally is from Algeria and is now an American citizen. We were on our honeymoon and we spent, 5 amazing days away, and we were taking a train to come back to our home. And we were laughing and joking and speaking a mishmash of Arabic and English and Spanish because his English wasn't great, my Arabic wasn't great, but we were, kind of laughing and having a good time, as you do on your honeymoon. And as we came back on the train, there were 2 people sitting next to us that kind of started making comments, and at first I thought, they're just laughing with us, they're joking around. We were in such a good mood, it never dawned on me that they might be mocking us. But indeed they were, and I didn't realize that until they stood up. It was a couple, a man and a woman, and they stood up to physically and violently threaten us. And the woman came and swung at me, the man came and swung at my husband, and this went on for about 15 minutes. And nobody stood up. Not one person on the train stood up. No one said anything. No one tried to stop them. We're on our honeymoon. Finally, the furor died down. I don't even remember how. And we got off the train to be greeted by about 50 police officers, 2 standing at every entrance to the subway, looking for us and looking for the people that tried to assault us. And that was how my honeymoon ended. Sorry. But bias can also be very hidden and perpetrated by good people who really don't even know that they're being biased. My grandmother was a wonderful, wonderful Christian woman. She loved my husband, but this implicit bias came out in small ways. Once we went to her rest home. She spent the last few years of her life in a rest home. And we went there to have dinner with her one night, and she introduced us to all of her friends at the dinner table, and she said, "This is my granddaughter Meira, and this is her husband Ishmael. He's Muslim, but he's not scary." She didn't mean this in a mean way, but she felt like she had to qualify it, right? Like, he's one of the good ones. Don't be scared of him. And she was a wonderful person. She just didn't know. There are also legal forms of Islamophobia, which I will tell you about in a minute. Muslims are the least warmly regarded faith group in America. This is just a fact. A Brookings poll last November showed that 61% of Americans hold an unfavorable view of Islam, and 46% of Americans hold an unfavorable view of Muslims. I sadly suspect that these numbers have gone up since then and during this vicious election cycle. So why is there so much Islamophobia? Where is this coming from? And how did we get here? How did we get to this state of affairs? And many people, when you ask this question, immediately say, well, it's terrorism. People are scared. That's why we're in this situation. That it's somehow some kind of rational response to terrifying events. And yet after 9/11, unfavorable views of Muslims actually went down. They did not go up. They went down because the Bush administration, whatever you think of his administration, he made an effort to make sure that Muslims were not vilified after September 11th. And if you actually look at what happens, and you look at when negative views of Muslims spikes between just pre-9/11 and the end of 2013, you notice an interesting thing, that where anti-Muslim rhetoric or anti-Muslim bigotry, anti-Muslim sentiment actually spikes is in 3 places. In the lead up to the Iraq War amongst the general public, in the 2008 and 2012 elections amongst Republicans only. And that is because anti-Muslim sentiment follows trends in politics and election rhetoric far more than it follows any kind of terrorist action. In fact, where it didn't spike and where you would have expected it in this scenario to spike is after 9/11, which it didn't, and after the Boston Marathon bombing, which it didn't. So it's very, very heavily tied to election rhetoric. But it isn't just political rhetoric that stokes these fires of Islamophobia. There are a few other factors at play. One of them is the media. 50% of Americans do not know a Muslim personally, and media very much shapes the way people think of things, especially when you've never met someone. But the vast majority of media coverage about Muslims and Islam is negative. One study by Media Tenor, which is based in Germany, showed that 80% of coverage of Islam and Muslims in the United States is negative, compared to 73% of coverage of North Korea, which is a designated terrorist state. They have less negative coverage. And another study showed that over 25 years, the New York Times, which is one of the supposed better papers, portrayed Islam and Muslims more negatively than things like cancer, cocaine, alcohol, tobacco. And in addition to these factors, there's an entire industry that's devoted simply to manufacturing Islamophobia. This is what they do. There is a $200 million industry, 33 groups, who literally spend their time making people afraid of Muslims and of Islam. It's very well funded, it's worked its way into the mainstream, and you've probably seen some of these people and some of their research on mainstream television. So while terror events don't help the situation, Islamophobia is really something that's been manufactured by a lot of these different factors. So where does this get us? What impact does this have on all of us? And I would argue that it makes us both less free as a society and sadly less safe. So for Muslims and those who are somehow perceived of or suspected of being Muslim, the effect of this safety factor is very, very clear. The upshot of all these negative attitudes and negative portrayals is discrimination. We did a study last year where we surveyed Muslims, Jews, Catholics, and Protestants. And more than half, 60% of Muslims reported that they had experienced some form of discrimination based on their religion in the past year. And 20% of Muslims, that's 1 out of 5, said they reported regular discrimination based on their religion. Now, you would think that Jews would be a group that is similarly targeted, but only 5% of Jewish Americans reported regular discrimination as opposed to 20% of Muslims. So the magnitude of this discrimination is huge. As someone with a Jewish mother and a Muslim husband, I've experienced both my fair share of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and I can tell you it feels exactly the same. It doesn't matter what you call it. Hatred is hatred, and if you're the one on the receiving end of it, it's the same. And the sad part is that those who are probably most vulnerable and who have the least ability to deal with discrimination or the most visible are the most likely people to suffer from it. So women, especially those wearing hijab, young people who may not have the social support network to deal with discrimination, and those who are less educated are those who suffer the most from Islamophobia. And this discrimination is terrible, but more than this, we've seen really alarming incidents of violence or attempted violence towards Muslims and Muslim institutions in the past year. Hate crimes have always been a problem, but they have spiked in the last year. And while for other minorities things have gotten better, things have gotten much, much, much worse for Muslims. Just last week, a man from Los Angeles was arrested with large amounts of weapons and ammunition, charged with making terrorist threats against the Islamic Center of Southern California. And 3 men in Kansas a couple of weeks ago were arrested for a plot to blow up an apartment building today that housed Somali refugees, and they had made threats against an Islamic center. So there are very, very real and very dangerous consequences to all of this, and those who are Muslim or perceived to be Muslims fear for their safety every second of every day.
What's the right-hand column? On the right-hand column.
Of the back, go back to the other one?
The right-hand column.
They were the, like, they either said don't know, or they had a response that wasn't categorized as regular. Yeah. It was don't know, not applicable. It was the kind of extra responses. Okay, so if you think this is just a Muslim problem or just a problem for Muslim Americans, it's not. Intolerance and bigotry is absolutely linked. A Gallup survey from 2013 showed that the variable that was most strongly linked to prejudice towards Muslims was prejudice towards Jews. So bigotry is rarely confined to one group. There's plenty of hate to be spread around, and it is. A research project that we did looked at state-level legislation that affected predominantly minorities. So we looked at legislation that affected African American and Latinos, Muslims. We looked at reproductive rights legislation that largely affects women. We looked at gay marriage bans that affect the LGBT community. So we wanted to look at how all of this sort of restrictive rights measures at the state level, at the state legislature level, were interlinked. And what we found, not super surprisingly, is that efforts to restrict the rights of Muslims by instituting anti-Sharia bills absolutely overlap with measures to restrict the rights of other people. And we found an 80% overlap. So 80% of lawmakers who were sponsoring or co-sponsoring a bill that restricted the rights of Muslims also sponsored a bill in the reproductive rights arena or the LGBT arena or the anti-union arena. These are all very, very interlinked. And anti-Sharia bills actually had the highest overlap with all of these other measures. And what we found in this research was that Muslims are almost being used like a canary in a coal mine. So I don't know if you remember back, before we had lots of technology, miners used to put a canary in the entrance to the mines. And if the canary died, if the toxic air killed it, the miners didn't go down to the mine that day. And in some ways, Muslims are those canaries these days, right? So laws that are, anti-Sharia laws that are specifically targeted at restricting the rights of Muslims are being used to slip in other measures that otherwise wouldn't get passed. So one example is in North Carolina. In North Carolina back in 2013, an anti-Sharia bill was introduced, and literally at the 11th hour when the bill was going to a vote, there was a very planned intention, a very planned insertion of reproductive rights restrictions that were inserted into the bill at the last minute. And they did that because they knew that nobody was going to complain about an anti-Muslim measure. That wasn't going to be a problem. So slip in something else and we'll get that passed too. So you're not a Muslim, you're not another minority, none of these bills affect you. What does this have to do with you? Why should you care? Apart from caring about your fellow human beings, but why else should you care? Well, fear erodes the freedom and democracy we all have come to know and love in this country. According to research done by neuroscientists, fear makes us more accepting of three things: authoritarianism, conformity, and prejudice. So fear, this drummed up fear that is pervasive, is allowing our society to accept things that are just completely and utterly unacceptable. And perhaps most concerning of all is that this makes us all far less safe. With all of this rhetoric, communities of color fear every day. But for the rest of us, this strengthens terrorist rhetoric. This polarizing rhetoric exactly feeds into the hands of what a group like ISIS is trying to say, right? That Islam and the West are at odds, that the West is somehow at war with Islam. We're reinforcing exactly their messaging by acting this way. So what can we do about this? We have to replace fear with facts. So I want to give you a couple of things that you can maybe share with others. One is that we've been here before. Many of us know that 100 years ago, or a little bit more, Catholics were the Muslims, right? Immigration from Ireland and other Catholic countries had become larger. And they were seen as the other. They were otherized. Their loyalty to the United States was questioned. It was sort of like, can you be both loyal to the Vatican and loyal to the United States? And this was sort of questioned by other people. A political party called the Know Nothing Party actually sprung up and was created specifically to restrict the rights of Catholics, and laws were instituted to codify this intolerance. There were religious wear laws where nuns were prohibited basically from working in public schools by not being able to wear their habits. And the Blaine amendments ensured that no federal funding went to parochial schools, so that Catholic schools didn't get any money. And these laws are still on the books in a lot of places, and they're now being used to restrict the rights of other people, including Muslim women who wear hijab. So we can't think that this is something new. This is something that keeps repeatedly coming up in the United States. We allowed it to happen to the Catholics, we saw it happen to the Jews, and now we're seeing it again. I think it's really important to note that Muslims are actually the most ethnically diverse faith community in this country. There is no dominant ethnic or racial majority within the Muslim community. And that's a really important thing to understand, because Muslims are both Muslims and Black, and all that that entails. They're Muslim and Latino, they're Muslim and immigrant, they're Muslim and gay. They are dealing with layers upon layers of bigotry and racism, not just Islamophobia, and I think that's important to recognize. Now, when it comes to this pesky word fear, I'm going to come back to that, right? Because that's the thing that keeps coming up. But our research actually showed that Muslims are exactly as likely as any other faith group to reject violent attacks on civilians by small groups. There's no difference there. And Muslims are actually far more likely to reject violence against civilians by military, which is a war crime, according to the Geneva Conventions, right? So the headline here should be, why are more people not concerned about war crimes? Why are we focusing on Muslims apparently not rejecting violence by small fringe groups? And I think one thing to notice is that a lot of the policies that have been proposed to sort of combat this alleged threat are actually really misguided. So there's been a lot of calls to like infiltrate mosques, right? Securitize mosques because they're hotbeds of radicalism. Actually, what we found in our research is that mosques are forces for moderation and tolerance. That people who frequently go to the mosque are more likely to be registered to vote, they're more likely to vote, they're more likely to cooperate with interfaith and other neighbors to solve problems. So the policies that have been suggested are not even well thought out, and they're not based on real data or research. And another myth is that you can't be both Muslim and American at the same time, right? That there's somehow this trade-off, and if you're more religious, then you must be less American or vice versa. But actually what we found is that Muslims are just as American as the next guy, that the religious identity and American identity across faith groups is roughly the same, and that there's absolutely no contradiction. In fact, what we found is that Muslims with a stronger religious identity also have stronger American identities. So you know, we have a tool on our website that's a 5-minute video that sums up some of the data. It's entitled, How Well Do You Know American Muslims? And it's something that's really easily shareable via social media or through email. So if you want to share any snippets of data with your friends and family, this video is a great way to do that. So I wanted to close and open up for Q&A in a second. But before I do, I want to throw out a couple of suggestions. I think everyone who's concerned about this is sort of asking themselves, well, what do we do? What do we do? How do we deal with this, and what can we do? So a couple of suggestions from me, and I'm sure you'll all have other great suggestions. The first one is examine your own biases. My grandmother, my lovely grandmother, had no idea that the way she reacted and things she said were really offensive and hurtful. She didn't know. She wasn't intending to be mean, but I think we all need to examine our own biases. A friend of mine, Rachel Lesser, said that it's okay to hate racism or bigotry and your own part in it without hating yourselves, that you should allow that opportunity to really think about your own thought processes, and you know, if you realize that maybe you have these hidden depths, to just eliminate them and not be angry with yourself. The other thing you can do is challenge bigotry, especially to those who aren't in the choir. There are a lot of people who don't come to places like this, who don't hear this kind of information. If you go to Thanksgiving and your Uncle Joe starts mouthing off about Muslims, say something, right? Don't let him get away with it. Call out bias wherever you see it. Don't just stand idly by like the people on the train when we were getting assaulted. Stand up, do something. Build coalitions with others. A lot of groups are being similarly targeted. There's a lot of people who are really concerned about what's going on. We have to band together. We cannot work in silos anymore. Vote. I'm sure everyone here voted yesterday, but there are elections in 2 years and 2 years from that. Keep on voting. It's really important. And I just want to close with a saying by a thinker named Abraham Joshua Heschel, who said, in a free society, some people are guilty, but all are responsible. We are all responsible for what's going on, and we have to do something about it. So thank you very much. Do you want to use this one?
No. Yes, okay. Thank you very much for your presentation. We're going to open up to Q&A. I'm going to ask folks who would like to ask a question to actually form a line behind me to ask the question. And somehow, considering with the wave of refugees coming into the country, whether or not the Institute has tracked a rise in fear, specifically with regards to Islamophobia.
Yeah, that's a really good question. We haven't done research that would tell us that or not. The last survey we did was back in January, right after a lot of this political rhetoric started becoming more real and more scary. Our next survey of faith groups happens this January, so we will have a lot more information then. Anecdotally, I'm assuming yes, but we don't have any empirical data to say so.
Hi, I'm Danielle, and I'm with the Jewish community, and I just wanted to let you know that there was an FBI statistics of 2014, and 57% of anti-religious hate crimes are targeted to Jews. Only 16% are targeted to Muslims. There's a 40% difference between hate crimes to Jews and Muslims.
Not mean at all to minimize the anti-Semitism that exists. I'm half Jewish. My entire mother's family is Jewish. I am not minimizing at all that is a serious problem in this country. My slide on the discrimination is merely just data. We asked Jews the same questions that we asked Muslims, and that was just the data. It's not to minimize what's happening to the Jewish community as well.
I'm Alan Kieswetter, and I'm a retired Foreign Service officer and a scholar at the Middle East Institute. Thank you for an excellent lecture. I really appreciate it. I'd like to give just a little footnote that might be slightly more positive.
Please do.
A man named Shebli Tahami, who was a scholar at the University of Maryland and also at the Brookings Institute, and I think you quoted his work before. He did a study of American views of Muslims and Islam, two separate questions. And he did it in November of 2015. He did it again in May of 2016. And then after the Orlando events, he did it again in June. And some very interesting statistics. And your comment about this caused me to look them up online. And the question of, do you have a favorable view of Muslims? In November, 53%. In May, it was 58%. And in June, it was 62% who had a favorable view of Muslims. The interesting thing is, and going to one of the other questions that was asked, is what was the major indicator of a favorable view? Knowing a Muslim person. And I would answer the question of what we can do about it. Get to know a Muslim. You'll discover that Muslims are people just like the rest of us.
Thank you. Yeah. We saw something really beautiful happening out of tragedy is born good things sometimes, and after the Orlando massacre, the Muslim community really got together, and I mean hundreds of people were on these calls trying to figure out how on earth to respond to this awful, awful, awful thing. And the gay community as well really embraced the Muslim community along with African American, Latino, and other people of conscience, just anyone who was interested in dealing with this. And it was so heartening to see how everyone kind of band together to try and figure out how to respond to this whole thing. And a gay man wrote a piece, an op-ed in the paper the day afterwards and said, I don't want you to use this tragedy to hate another group of people. My people have suffered enough, and I don't want my tragedy to cause more hatred. That was just a really powerful thing that man did.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
I don't necessarily have questions, although they might come to me. I'm a guest from UUCA, the Unitarian congregation in Oakton, and I just would like to encourage people to think there's much that can be done. You know, we, feeling the pressures of tolerance as a basic principle within our community, formed a Muslim liaison group to have better interactions. It grew in part out of teaching a world religions class for adults. We had historically taught world religions to our youth group, only to realize so many adults had almost no education in world religions. I was raised Catholic. It was a near occasion of sin to visit a Protestant congregation. And many of us have this great deficit in our understanding of the enormous diversity in religion, but that can then breed a disrespect. So from the world religions class, we traveled when we were studying for 3 sessions. Could you imagine trying to summarize in 3 sessions? It's long. But we had both the institution education, but then the field trip. And we were accepted warmly and greeted mightily at the Shirley Gate Masjid, not too far away from our congregation. And that then led to relationship, which also led to teaching a course by one of the scholars within that community about the very important meaning of prayer and how deep and personal that was. It's led to joint efforts around Martin Luther King Jr. Day on shared social justice projects, and it's grown to a support through the Lutheran immigrant services of adopting a family that just came from Afghanistan. But all of those become planes within which to develop deeper relationships. And my good friend Imam Ali Siddiqui was inspirational, encouraging us to form a brunch bunch. So half Muslims, half Unitarians, beginning to really know each other as opposed to kind of a one-off. You know, it's one thing to say, I met you and your husband is Muslim and I can go home and tell my family, but to sit down and break bread and begin to have thoughtful conversations about where did we come from and how did we get here and where are we going, I think is really rich. And we're at the point now of struggling to go through the mitosis of we're too big as a small group of brunch bunches, we need to have a second one. So how do we recruit people is the joyful challenge that we're experiencing. But I'm sure there are many other examples within which to do what you said. Get to know people is really the best way of conquering our fears. So thank you.
Thank you.
I have 3 questions, two for you.
Okay.
Who funded your research? why did you separate Catholics and Protestants? Why not just Christians? Or where were the UUs and where were the atheists, non-religious people?
Yeah.
Those are two questions for you. A third is, I was chatting with some Muslim women here, and if it won't embarrass you too much, I'd like to hear your reactions to the findings in the study, or even your experiences about discrimination and about Islamic hate. Thank you. If it won't embarrass.
I'll quickly answer the very good questions about the survey. So we do research on a whole host of issues. I shared our research that's specifically focused on Islamophobia, but we do research on internal community challenges as well. So we're doing research right now on how to make mosques more inclusive and more vibrant and effective spaces. We've done research on marriage and divorce within the Muslim community. We've done research on how to support aging parents. We do research on a whole host of things that are related to the Muslim community. So our funding comes from half individuals, community members, and others, who are not Muslim. And half of our funding comes from foundations, including the Kellogg Foundation. We've had money from Open Society Foundation, Ford Foundation in the past, the Pillars Fund, the Security and Rights Collaborative at the Proteus Fund. So we get a lot of sort of mainstream foundation money. The question about the religious nuns, the atheists or people who don't identify with any religion, and why we split out Protestants and Catholics, we wanted to look at the 4 major faith groups in the country. We lumped all Protestant denominations into one, but we did decide to separate out Catholics to see if there was any difference. Because there are pretty fundamental differences, not necessarily in our data. Well, we could argue that all night, but I mean, I've worked a lot with both the Catholic and Protestant churches, both in reproductive health and otherwise, and it's important to separate them out. The religious nuns or atheists, we, in our next survey, we definitely plan to do that. In this one, we had challenges with the data, so it was, in this one, we weren't able to separate that group out, but in future surveys, we definitely plan to. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, did any of you want to speak? She asked you to, okay. Great.
Good evening. First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. It's a good experience for people to know. Second, I want to thank the church, especially Tommy sitting there. We've been using it actually every Ramadan. We pray our Tarawih in here, and we pray every Jummah in here. Every Friday we have 2 congregations, so we really appreciate, and this is a good interfaith action to show that we are one community and we are all Americans. So get to know us, as she said. You're welcome to come and visit with us every Friday, and during the month of Ramadan you can come and sit with us and ask us any question you want to have. Also, I mean, being part of the Interfaith, there is the Culmore Clinic that we created by Interfaith. I'm the vice president of the board, and it's a free clinic right here in Culmore. And this is the power of us as a community to come together. I think that getting to know each other is the best gift we have, especially in this country. Thank you so much for the presentation, and thank you so much for having us here, and we'll continue to have you here. We're organizing the program. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. I would not repeat what he said about thank you. You always belong to here. You're all American. I'm taking this opportunity to announce about upcoming interfaith events, which called Cup of Tea. Alan, he will send a video for everybody registered for this event. If you sign up, you will get that video, which is basically a campaign happening in Norway years ago about like having Muslims invite people from other faith to their houses to get to know each other in a better way. So I've been doing this here in this area with a lot of our neighbors, and I see a lot of familiar faces here. Can I ask, like, just to show hands, how many of you attend Cup of Tea with me before? Yeah, a few of you. That's a good number. So we've been doing this for the last 4 years, and I see this specific, like, interfaith gathering is different than any others. We get together with a lot of conferences and interfaith dinners, but invite Americans to your house. It feels so different. So we will have one upcoming Cup of Tea in December 4. If you guys are interested to be part of this, to host one, or to invite it for one of us, this is the application. It's kind of like a little survey with information about your availability and everything. We have limited places for the one coming up and will be in Bethesda, but usually we will have it here. So this is what we need in our community right now. Go to know your neighbor, get together, just as simple as cup of tea, and have the conversation. Share your fear, share your support, and share your love. That's what we needed. So I really appreciate if you can take the application, give it for me back or for Alan, and the email will be sent for the video where you have more information about the campaign. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your research. I think it's very important, and I wanted to know if there was a connection. I think there is, between the fact that we're waging war against Muslim countries and the proliferation of the Islamophobia industry. And what do you know about the anatomy of the 30 groups that are highly funded to actually, it seems, create propaganda that's dehumanizing and a form of anti-Semitism, oftentimes because Muslims are Semites as well. And it does seem to be part of, that kind of form of garden variety bigotry. But when there's war and the sale of military arms and money involved, it becomes an economic force, Islamophobia. Right. So,
No, that's very apt. I rather than answering that question, I want to direct you actually to a great report called Fear Inc. and Fear Inc. 2. There are 2 reports that were written by other research organizations that really lay out this Islamophobia industry, tell you who these people are, what they do, where they get their money from. I mean, they did a whole multi-year research process around this industry. So Fear Inc. and Fear Inc. 2. The Southern Poverty Law Center also just recently came out with a list of 15 kind of top Islamophobes, just kind of people to watch out for, so that if you're watching the news and you see one of these people come on as a so-called expert on Islam, you're a little more aware of kind of where they're coming from. So I would highly encourage everyone to check those 3 resources out. They're very helpful.
I'll make this quick. Hi, my name is Fazia Dean. I am the Interfaith and Outreach Liaison for Dar al-Hijra, and I want to thank this church for all its outreach activities. We collaborate with UUCA on a variety of issues with voice, etc., etc. What I would like to suggest as a comment and piggyback off of what Ilya said with the cup of tea. At Dar al-Hijra, we are a large mosque that's open for tours. Please book a tour. And it's easy to do it. You just go on the website and you can call the main number, or you can go to outreach@daralhijra.net and just ask for a tour. So that's one way to get to meet more than one Muslim at a time. Another way is we have an annual event that happens every April, and it's called Taste of Islam, where we have tents and Moroccan tents and Palestinian tents, and you can come in and have a cup of tea or have a taste of their food, and there's activities and henna and songs and poetry and vendors, and that's April 23rd. So, and there's more activities if you go on our website. So I encourage you to get to know a Muslim. Thank you.
Thank you very much. These are all really good ideas.
So first I want to thank you, Meira, for a really wonderfully informative
You pronounced my
presentation.
name perfectly. Thank you. That's so unusual.
That's because I'm Gila Langer.
especially in the Jewish community, has the great good fortune of meeting here at UUCA, and we are so delighted to be your guest. And it occurs to me that the wisdom that we've been developing over the last few years about the importance of alliances has never been so important as it is today and going forward. Alliances and relationships, but first alliances. I'm happy to report that between the Jewish and Muslim communities, there is growing development of some ties and alliances. There's going to be another meeting, I think it's our third annual meeting, of imams and rabbis in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. And we are setting up a rapid response team or action team that will provide joint responses if there are instances of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And I think that's something that we are really so important for our community to be standing together with each other. And this church, I have been in touch with Reverend Peebles, and we are very much looking forward to working with the church community and the Muslim community, the Moroccan community here, and Kol Ami, my Jewish community, to do some joint programming and develop more relationships among the three communities over this coming year. So I look forward to that.
Thank you. Just one quick anecdote about that. Today on Facebook, where all things happen now, unfortunately, spend way too much energy and time on Facebook. But there was a really beautiful, there's been a lot of beautiful posts today. And one of them came from a young woman named Maggie Siddiqui, who works at the El Hibri Foundation. She's a wonderful young woman who does communications there. And she posted today, she literally posted a picture of her phone and a recording of a voicemail that had been left on her phone. And she said, I had to share this with people because this was the most beautiful thing that happened on such a dark day. And it was a call by a rabbi friend of hers who called and left a message saying, I just want you to know you're not alone, that I will be here today, tomorrow, if anything happens. It was the kindest, most thoughtful message I've heard in a really long time. And so that was just really amazing.
Thank you so much for being here, for your presentation.
Thanks for
quick announcements. For starters, there are materials on the table here if you have not received anything, along with the survey and sign-up sheet for you to complete. On behalf of Alan Kellum and Reverend Peebles and the Committee for Peace and Justice in Israel and Palestine, thank you so much for coming to our event. So thank you very much. Thank you again.
Thank you.